All right, welcome to the Thrive Training Breakdown video. In this video, we're going to show you how to get the most out of your training so you can get the best results. So the first concept to understand is the concept of training versus exercise. And this is important because this is where a lot of guys go wrong, and this is why they end up not getting any results, because a lot of guys go into the gym and they're just throwing weights around without a coach. They don't have any structure, there's no progression, there's no purpose. One day they're doing this exercise, the next day they're doing this exercise, and just kind of wondering why their body isn't changing and why their body's not responding. So remember, when you walk into the gym, the goal is to train and it's not to exercise. Training is methodical, it's purposeful. You know what you did last week, you know what you're trying to do this week. There's progression there, right? And your body doesn't respond to exercise. That's an important thing to understand. If you're just walking on the treadmill, doing the elliptical, or just doing something that's getting a sweat going, it's not like that's an unhealthy thing. But for most guys that want to look in the mirror and they want to see their body transform, they want to see shape, they want to have good confidence in what they see with their physique, they want to build their metabolism. That happens through productive and structured training. So that's what we want to get right inside of this program. So remember, the goal is to make progress phase by phase. Now, one important concept to understand is reps in reserve. So this is a training metric used in strength workouts to describe the number of additional repetitions that could theoretically be performed after a set is completed. So to put this into perspective for you, this is how your training is laid out. So your training is built into 4-week training blocks. So as you can see on the left-hand side, you see the week, and then you see the reps in reserve. So week 1, we're starting at a 3 RIR, or reps in reserve, meaning you have 3 reps left in the tank. So as an example, let's say you're doing a back squat, barbell back squat, and your goal is 10 reps. That means in week 1, when you finish your 10th rep, you're using a weight where you could have comfortably done another 3 reps, right? You have 3 reps in reserve. Right? Once you get to week 2, if you're doing that same back squat for 10 reps, you're using a weight where you could at least do 2 good quality reps. That's 2 reps in reserve. So you kind of get the idea, right? Once we get to week 3, the weight is increasing to a point where you can only do 1 rep left in the tank, or 1 rep in reserve. By the time we get to week 4, you're not quite going to muscular failure. We don't want to be at 0 because you don't want to fail. You don't want to hurt yourself doing a back squat or something like that, right? But you're pretty close to it. Like, you're pretty close. Like, when you're finishing that 10th rep, you're like, really working to get that 10th rep, but you could have still safely done maybe another half rep theoretically, right? You get what I'm trying to say here, but there's progression to it, right? So your training is split up into these 4-week phases. This allows time for progress, but not stagnation, because every 4 weeks we're introducing new movements, different tempos, different techniques. It's keeping it fresh. It's keeping your body guessing. But it's also enough time where we really can progress through our training blocks. Remember, the goal is not to go max effort every single week. That's what a lot of guys do, and they end up burnt out or end up hurting themselves, right? So we start out with a manageable weight week 1, and then we aim to progress week by week as you're working through the training block. So keynote here is we only use the reps in reserve strategy on your main compound lifts. So the big boy lifts, so to speak, right? Squat, bench press, overhead press, deadlift. But it's important to understand how your training is laid out and how we want you to progress through the training block. So let's talk about the order of exercises. So when you start a workout, typically the first 2 to 3 movements are the most important ones, and they're going to give you the best return on your investment. So look at the ones on the right-hand side here. These are going to be things like the compound lift. So your squat, your deadlift, your overhead press, your bench press, your chin up, your row, right? 80% of your progress is going to come from these compound lifts, and the other 20% from more of the pump style exercises or the accessory exercises, which we're going to see here in a moment. So we use the RIR scale on these movements right here. So when you're looking at this little RIR scale, when you're doing squats, deadlifts, overhead press, right? That's where week 1, we're at the 3, week 2, we're at the 2, and so on. Now, what's important to note here on the bottom is going for a specific amount of weight doesn't always pan out. It's a subjective measure, the RIR, because one thing you have to understand is, like, let's say you're as a squat as an example, easy thing to think about. Some weeks you feel great, like you feel strong. The weight feels light. You're like, dude, yeah, let's do it, man. I'm putting on 5-10 more pounds. I'm feeling great. And there's some days where you get into the gym. Maybe you didn't sleep well. Maybe you're not hydrated. Maybe you're stressed out, where you put that bar on your back and like, dang, man, that same weight I was using last week feels freaking heavy. You know what I'm saying? So trying to tell you, hey, this is what you need to do this week. You need to squat 285 pounds because you need to follow this progression. That doesn't always pan out because it doesn't account for some days you feel great, some days you don't feel great. So that's why we like to use the reps in reserve, and it's a subjective measure. So you always want to feel like if you're, how many reps you have left in the tank. This creates intelligent training. It helps you prevent you from being injured and can really maximize your overall consistency in the gym. So let's talk about accessory movements. So accessory movements, some examples that you see on the right-hand side. So like a dumbbell bicep curl, a dumbbell lateral raise, maybe a leg extension for your quadricep muscles, a tricep push down for the back of your arms, a chest fly, a hammer curl, right? These are supplemental movements that complement the primary exercises. You want to think of the primary exercises like big bricks, right? And you want to think of these supplemental exercises as the cement that holds those bricks together, right? So the goal is blood flow on these movements and mind to muscle connection. So if you're doing a bicep curl, you truly want to be thinking about the bicep muscle. You want to be contracting the bicep muscle, right? A lot of mind to muscle connection. When you're doing movements like this, where you're doing squats and deadlifts and overhead press, you're not thinking about contracting your glutes when you're doing a heavy squat, right? You're thinking about control. You're thinking about balance. You're thinking about exploding from the bottom. You're thinking about bracing properly, right? So it's a big difference between how you think and approach the compound lifts and the accessory lifts. Remember, the accessory lifts is blood flow, mind to muscle. And these are typically safe to routinely operate at a 0 or 1 reps in reserve. So as an example, if you're doing a bicep curl, you're picking a weight where when you get to 10, you could barely get that 10th rep. You're squeezing, you're like, bam, or maybe you could have only done 1 rep left in the tank. These supplemental type movements are far safer to routinely operate at that 0 or 1 reps in reserve. So remember, progression isn't a major focus. You will use some heavier weights, like on a lat raise as your shoulders get stronger. Sure, you might increase by 5 pounds or so. But when you're doing a bicep curl, you're not going to end up curling 150-pound dumbbells. That's just not how it works. So when you're doing accessory movements, yeah, we want to get stronger over time, but you're not always going to be adding weight week to week, and that's important to understand. So let's talk about strategically how to attack your workouts when you're actually doing them. So we want to understand the concept of top sets versus back off sets. So a top set is going to technically be your most intense and your hardest set. So as an example, if you're doing front squats on the right hand side and your goal is to complete 4 sets of 8, typically the hardest set you're going to do is going to be set 1. That's what we call your top set, right? And then when you get to set 2 and 3 and 4, usually you're reducing the weight and doing what we call back off sets, right? So the goal is to warm yourself up for your top set and then end up switching to those back off sets, because the reason why is fatigue accumulates set to set. So if you're trying to do the hardest set possible at set 4, by that time your heart rate's up, you're a little bit fatigued, your quads are pumping, right? Maybe if you try to do the heaviest set on set 4, your form might break down, you might lose balance, maybe your bracing isn't quite as strong, and you can, maybe put yourself at a little bit more of a risk for injuring yourself, right? So that's why we want to warm up without fatiguing yourself. You're not trying to make yourself fatigue, you're just warming up your nervous system, your muscular system. Typically the reps are very low, so by the time you get to set 1, you're ready for a good tough set, and then the rest of them are back off sets. So top set is usually set 1. In some cases, it can also be set 2. So here's an example. Again, 4 sets of 8 front squats. So let's say you're doing a front squat, you're a strong guy, right? Let's say you can comfortably do 200 pounds for 8 reps. Like, not a big deal. You could do that. So your top set could be a recommendation of 225 pounds. And the remaining 3 sets will be, back off sets. You kind of warm yourself up. Set 1 is 225 pounds. It's the hardest set, or the top set. And by the time you get to set 2, you can typically reduce the load by about 10 to 15%. So maybe you're doing about 205 pounds. You end up doing that for set 2. Maybe you do it again for set 3. And then maybe set 4, you even strip off another 10 pounds and do, 195, right? So that's the concept of a top set first, and then you end up doing back off sets. So the aim is to increase the weight week to week. Even adding 2.5 pounds to 5 pounds to your movement is still progress, right? We want to slowly be making progress on these big boy lifts. We always want to be focusing on good form and good range of motion. We never want to sacrifice form. We want to listen to our body, and we want to use these techniques to progress through your training phase.